Hello and welcome to Hattons Model Railways. I'm Dave Mylett. I'm the Exclusive Commissions Manager here at Hattons, and I'm here today to talk to you about the A3s. And we've got Tony Wright here, who's a bit of an expert on the LNER to help us. Now, you were last with us in 2007, weren't you, Tony?
I believe so, yes. And it shows how much you've climbed the ladder of promotion at Hattons, because when we did the DVD then, I don't want to be disparaging, but you were just picking, weren't you?
I was picking. I've been with the company about 3 years then, started in 2004, and I was picking, so I'd moved up from packing the parcels, and I was on picking and also answering the phones.
So well done. Anyway, I'm Tony Wright. I have a little bit of knowledge in the hobby of model railways. After a career in teaching, I became a freelance photographer, writer, model maker with a specialism on locomotives of the LNER, and I'm here today with Dave to discuss some wonderful A3 models in O gauge. For a time from 2003 until my retirement in 2011, I was assistant editor and photographer for British Railway Modelling, and now in retirement I write books on LNER locomotives and articles for British Railways Illustrated. I'm also writing books for Book Law, so I know a weeny bit, but
yes.
Having had a quick glance at some of these, they do look really good, so we'll have a look at them if we may.
Let's have a more detailed look now.
Obviously a very, very fine model indeed. It's representative of Papyrus at the time that she broke the world speed record for a non-streamlined locomotive, which she still holds to that day. Did you know that? Yeah. 108 miles an hour. Down Stoke Bank, not far from where we live now. So, corridor tender, diagram boiler, 94 HP, as an A3. Now, there are one or two not production issues, may I say, but it really shouldn't have a speedometer, but I assume that will be removed in the production one.
Yes, it will be included on the production one, but it's fairly easy to remove. It's just
so that will be for the customer.
To do, yes.
Okay, and I've been told you've said I'm an expert, and I better prove that. I'm good at lying. The LNER painting specification was black stocks for the buffers. So although the red of the buffer beam is correct, the housings, the stocks for the buffers, they'll be black, and they will be attended to on the production.
This is a pre-production sample. Obviously that's for picking up things like this. So on the production ones they will be black.
And the cost of these are going to be around 700 and something.
£750.
Do you know that's less than a kit?
Yes.
I mean, if I built one of these, say from a DJH kit, and I used to build professionally, with a professional paint finish to the standard of that, you'd be looking at £2,500.
Yeah, but it's bringing it to the availability of more people. So obviously there is people that will still pay the £2,500 for the finesse of that, but we want to make this sort of thing available to more people. But
this is much more inclusive now, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
So, and you see this more and more with O gauge, where instead of it being an incredibly expensive scale at entry level, I mean, Dapol are doing 060s for £200, aren't they?
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons we've also done the coaches to go with it as well. We didn't just want to produce the locomotives and then people go, well, I've still got to pay like many hundreds of pounds for a coach. We're producing the coaches for £250 as well to go with them. So it makes a train, while not pocket money, it's still an affordable way of getting into O gauge.
Yes. So you've got Papyrus here in record-breaking condition, and it'll probably be okay then up to 1938, when she would have lost her corridor tender to an A4.
Yep.
And it's good to see you haven't put the coal rails on, because that would have made it unsuitable for Papyrus.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that was only on the very first tenders.
Exactly.
And they were removed.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've mentioned quite a bit the record-breaking thing, and that is a theme that we've tried to continue through.
Yeah.
Not so many of the A3s, but definitely through the A4s.
Yeah.
With there's a lot of record breakers. We'll be doing another video of the A4s, so you'll see that in that one.
Well, you certainly seem to have done your research, so well done on that.
Right, shall we move on to the next one then?
Why not? Right. Okay, now we have arguably the most famous locomotive in the land, and I say locomotive because the LNER in its wisdom in 1928 had 2 Flying Scotsmans. I think that's the plural, isn't it?
Yes, it would be, yes.
One was the non-stop train, and the other is the locomotive. And for generations after, people have become confused. So just in case somebody doesn't know, this is Flying Scotsman. The train is the definitive article, the Flying Scotsman. And everybody's granddad, even if they live on the moon, will have driven this. You come across that at shows. Anyway, enough of my waffle. Now, this is more in as preserved condition because she's got left-hand drive, and Flying Scotsman didn't get right-hand drive until post-war, and she's also an A3, and she was an A1 with the lower pressure boiler until 1947. Now, don't let that put people off. If people want this model to represent LNER condition, then that's up to them. But strictly speaking, depends how pedantic one is, this is not entirely correct for pre-war. Because before the war, she lost this tender to an A4, so for most of her life, she had a streamlined non-corridor tender. And quite correctly, she's got the 94A boiler with the perforated steam collector, and I'm delighted to say you've got a streamlined dome.
Yes.
So many models down the years have what's called a banjo dome. So this is absolutely spot on for late 60s, 70s, 80s, with variations.
Yes.
It depends how one wants to be with regard to pedantry, because when Alan Pegler bought this locomotive in 1963, he wanted a corridor tender. Flying Scotsman didn't have one then. So he bought the tender off Lord Farringdon, A4, which had participated in the locomotive exchanges. So for absolute accuracy for 1963, and as I say, it depends how pedantic one is, the back end should be cut down. However, for later years, this is fine.
And it was cut down for the water cranes, wasn't it?
Yes, the water, sorry, I should have mentioned that. During the 1948 exchanges, the A4s participated, and they ran on the ex-Northwestern main line and the ex-Southwestern main line out of Euston and Waterloo respectively, and the water cranes to feed the tenders were too low for the LNER engines. So the back end was cut down. It should be straight across the back rather than curved, and these raves here were cut down. But not a lot of people know that, nor even care. But it is gone. Sorry.
Some of the other small differences are things like the superheater headers here, isn't it?
Yes,
for the A1 boiler. That
for an A1, yes.
Yeah, but in general terms, most people won't notice much of a difference.
No, and I'm trying to be fair. You have to be practical. There am I mentioning that if I built a locomotive like this, it would be in the thousands of pounds. Now, with the greatest respect, the customer would expect that kind of detail to be right. Otherwise, it'd be whizzing back to me. But at 700 quid, I mean, I don't know how you do it. You're all going to be paupers or something. It's on all the models, but even down to here, the return crank on the valve gear, you've represented the roller bearing.
Yeah.
Now, very, very few models actually replicate that. Beautiful. And the finish, I mean, these are factory finish. The paintwork is exquisite. This is as good as a top drawer professional painter. And it's a very, very difficult livery to capture. Now, you say, Dave, there's a difficulty in lining the bogie wheels.
Yeah, we're trying to get it done at the moment. We can't guarantee whether it is wheel production ones. The problem is the bogie wheels themselves are self-colour plastic.
Yeah.
And then the metal on the outside. Now, it's very difficult to print onto that due to the material. It's because of the way they're manufactured to keep them very durable.
Yeah.
So we are working on it.
Right, so that's a possibility.
Right, so this one is LNER Black. Now, up until a few years ago, I don't think many people recognise this livery, but Flying Scotsman was actually painted into this for a while in its restoration, so that's given it some sort of limelight, hasn't it?
It has. Just about all the LNER Pacifics were painted black during the war for reasons of economy, and the LNER was shortened to just NE. Edward Thompson would have liked that because his father was the ex-chief mechanical engineer of the North Eastern, and he married Vincent Raven's daughter.
Oh, right.
So he had an allegiance with the NE. It's an economy measure, obviously. One thing I might suggest is, are you considering weathering the motion? Because in wartime it would be highly unlikely to be polished. Is that a possibility?
It's not, unfortunately, with this, because of the way the motion's made.
Right.
It's made with this high finish, because it's just because if you leave it the bare metal, it doesn't look very realistic. So we put the high polish on it. It's not something that's too difficult for a modeller to do with.
No, I mean,
with some washes or something like that.
Yeah.
It's
any modeller worth their salt, just a wash of brown or grey. But I mean, obviously, when this was painted black during the war, not a great deal of care, not the same care would have been taken.
Gosh, no.
And certainly nobody would have polished the motion. Now, who would have thought, not long ago, just a few years ago even, that this period would become popular amongst railway modellers? It's a time when everything was pretty dirty, pretty drab, and yet there's quite a large number of people I know model that during the wartime period, or actually just after, because of course they weren't all painted green and shiny at the end of April 1945. They stayed in this condition for quite some time.
Yeah.
So you've got a non-corridor tender, which is correct for this, the high-sided standard tender. It's nice to see these breather vents as well. They're not always incorporated. Yeah.
It's also with the wartime modelling, it's obviously a lot harder to research with a lot of the censoring and the lack of availability of photography equipment during the war. It was,
well, people could be locked up for taking pictures.
Exactly.
Another point, black stocks.
Black stocks, yeah.
Okay, correct on the front.
Okay, so let's move on from LNER through to BR.
Please.
So this one's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, the Express Blue for BR.
It didn't wear very well.
No.
Why that should be, I'm not entirely sure, but the decision was taken in 1948 or 49 that blue would be the livery of express passenger locomotives. Of course, an A3 is certainly in that category. But for some reason, and who knows, it didn't wear very well. So it's very short-lived in a way, certainly in the lifetime of these engines. Only from 1948-49, and then in 1951 the decision was taken to paint them in Brunswick green. But it's a very handsome livery. I'm delighted to see you haven't lined the firebox.
Yep.
Because that's done far too often, and it was never lined. Other details to note, and this is on the other models as well, as I'm just sort of going along. The cinder guards for the driver to look out are present. They were clear glass. This one needs a whistle.
I think it's just fallen off, to be honest.
It's
because they've been through so many...
Well, if that's the only thing that's come off, then well done. So, again, things to note. I like this. Hattons. Some depots, as well as having the shed code, actually painted the depot's name. So that's Hattons, and for those who are poor at geography, that's on Tyneside. It's the secondary shed to Gateshead. What other things? Well, obviously it's named after a racehorse. Most of the A3s were named after racehorses. Now Sunstar is quite, I think, a jolly name, isn't it?
Well, I quite like the previous one we looked at, Captain Cuttle.
Captain Cuttle, yeah, that's a very nice name. But one was called Pretty Polly, which is, I don't think it's a brilliant name for a locomotive. The early Cycling Lion, that this was called, only ever on blue livery. You will occasionally see models which are wrong, which have the later style of it, which we'll see later, the coat of arms, as it were. But that's entirely correct. And again, the correct tender for this engine, the high-sided non-corridor tender.
Of course, this wasn't the first blue livery to be applied to steam locos. There was an experimental ultramarine as well, wasn't there?
There was, yes.
That was like a more purple tinge to it.
Yes, there were early experimental BR liveries, including violet, and 4 A4s were painted in that, as well as in blue. But this was the standard livery.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether every single locomotive in BR's early period was painted blue. Certainly not all the A1s were painted blue, but it's likely that all the A3s were painted blue, but I would have to check the record.
Yeah, I think there might have been one or two that went straight from black to green, but it was very, very few of them.
Yes. But again, lovely racehorse name. So here we have Windsor Lad, which was numerically the first A3 is 60035 because 60034 was numerically the last of the BRA4s, but actually it's one of the newer A3s.
It is, yes.
It's one of the 1934-35 built A3s, the final ones. And I'm also glad to note that you've got the correct Gilsan font for the name, because by then, by 1934-35, Gilsan was the established font for the LNER's lettering. So these later A3s had a different style of nameplate letter, and on the others it's got the correct non-Gilsan style. So again, I think this is the most handsome livery that the A3's ever carried, but that's a personal point of view. It wore very well. The first would be applied in probably 1951, and that was the last livery then that they ran with. There will be some minor details. This again has the early BR device rather than the later College of Heralds one. Again, the correct dome. And there really isn't much more to say other than it's just as fine a model as the others. Got a bit of a bend there on the cylinder drain. You can't see that. That's put straight now. I mean, what must be remembered, if we commented on a missing whistle, these have had already extensive running, haven't they?
Yeah, they've been run for a long time. We've used Pete Waterman's layout. We've released that on video already. We've got it on our own test tracks, and they've been to multiple exhibitions as well. So they've been in and out of the boxes a lot. There is a couple of little knocks and things.
Yeah, but that in a way shows how robust they are.
Yeah.
That it's only minor little sort of bits and pieces, not damage, but that's to be expected.
Wear and tear.
Wear and tear, fair wear and tear.
Yeah. I mean, one of these has been run now for 17 hours straight and come out of it with no problems whatsoever. So we are very, very happy with the running and everything on it. And one of the specifications we did very early on was all brass gears.
Yes.
So from the motor back down to the final gear on the axle, it is all brass gears.
Everything's brass.
Yeah.
No plastic.
No.
I'm pleased about that. Because some more modern 4mm locos I've come across, the gears have split.
Yes. Yeah, well, we didn't, obviously, if you're paying £750 for a locomotive,
it's going to
be pulling 8, 12 coaches, then
yes, indeed.
Definitely need it to be very, very robust. So this one's the White Knight. Obviously, the main detail difference in this one is the smoke deflectors.
Yes. For those who are not sure and maybe don't know, these are De Witt, or German-style smoke deflectors. When the A3s were all fitted with Kyle Chap double chimneys, it was Humorist, which was the only one before that. Although the locomotive's performance was improved an enormous amount, there was a very, very soft exhaust. So in 1960, at the instigation of Peter Townend, who was shedmaster at King's Cross, these were fitted, and they cleared the problem of smoke obscuring the driver's view.
Yeah.
Not every A3 with a double chimney was fitted, but the majority was. Again, the right tender. I'm pleased to see as well you've got the number plate in the right place.
Yeah.
Right at the end, the very last manifestation of the A3s, the number plate was lowered even further onto the top hinge strap in order to enable the top lamp bracket to be lowered even further. Although people argue over the aesthetics of A3s, this is the manifestation by which they were at their best. They were running on diesel deltic diagrams towards the end of their lives. They were able to go to Newcastle and back in a single turn. If you don't like the German smoke deflectors, that's a matter of opinion. But in terms of economy and efficiency, these were fantastic engines. Right at the end of their lives, 40 years old, and they were working harder, faster, longer than at any other time in their lives.
Yeah. And you say the deltic diagrams, you've got to remember, for those that don't know, they were 100 miles per hour diesel locos. It wasn't like they were anything normal. They were very extraordinary for their day. So for a steam locomotive to be able to keep up with that is very extraordinary.
Well, it makes you wonder how many unofficial 100-mile-an-hour runs.
Yes, definitely.
Down Stoke Bank. So yes, much the same specification. again here we've got the correct red stocks
Yeah.
for the buffer beam, which is the BR spec.
Now, going back a bit, you mentioned Humorist. They obviously, these weren't the first smoke deflectors to be fitted to A3s. Humorist actually went through a good, probably 5 or 6 different trials of different things. And there's some very, very radical trials done with different chimneys, with troughs in them, small smoke deflectors, large sort of A1 style smoke deflectors.
Yeah, are you going to consider some of those minute details in future models?
For the likes of Humorist, unfortunately, no, because they would mean a completely new boiler, things like that. So that's not something we can consider.
No.
A lot of people have asked about the tender, about the Great Northern style tender, and that is something we could consider because obviously the chassis is very similar, if not identical to the ones we've got here. It's just a new body. So yeah, that is something we could consider. Once we've got through these models, then we could look at that. But yeah, it's definitely something we could look at.
I would certainly recommend you investigate the GN10 because that's so characteristic of A3s, and more A3s actually had GN 8-wheel tenders than had this later style. It's a very elegant tender. I mean, this isn't wrong, but it's not as common as the GN style coal rail tender.
Well, obviously there's a lot of similarities and parts that we can use between these and the A4s as well. That's one of the reasons why we've gone for this over the Great Northern. But as you say, it is more popular, so it is something we probably will look at in the future.
Very nice indeed.
So we're back with Flying Scotsman.
In current preserved condition, presumably.
Preserved condition, exactly.
The most famous locomotive in the world, arguably, but it's causing problems. As she runs now on Network Rail, you get people who should know better. They trespass, they go near the tracks, in fact, cross the tracks, trying to take pictures or just watch it go by, take selfies on their phones. I haven't the faintest idea how to do that, by the way. I haven't got a mobile phone, not that that's of any interest. So there's danger, actually, of this wonderful locomotive not being allowed to run on Network Rail, which would be an awful situation.
It certainly would.
Anyway, this is the manifestation she is today, and it's been in this condition on and off from time to time. Occasionally it's been painted in LNER green, but retaining the double chimney and the German smoke deflectors, which historically is incorrect. This is the real thing. So I imagine this is one of the most popular ones in terms of pre-orders.
Yeah.
Because you can run this in modern day, you can have it next door to diesels. It sort of can be as up to date as today.
Yes.
On this one is the split handrail, which is correct, and the number plate lowered. The reason for the top lamp bracket being lowered, splitting the handrail, was one of safety. If you look here, you can see electric warning flashes. So a fireman or a driver putting a lamp or a headboard on the top bracket was in risk of being electrocuted. So it was lowered down.
Yeah.
So that's nice to see. And also nice to see, you've got the correct, incorrect 6.
Yes.
The proper 6 should be Gilsan, but for some reason Doncaster cast curly tail 6s. So this is right, but it's wrong. Do you get that?
A lot of the depots had their little flares, didn't they? They
did,
individuals.
Yes. They would have burnished smoke box doors and so on.
Yes.
And it's got the correct left-facing lion. When BR applied to the College of Heralds in Edinburgh in 1956 for an armorial coat of arms, it was granted, but only with a left-facing lion. And BR, in their ignorance, had this side with a right-facing lion, which is what a mess about the tenets of heraldry. It shows them remarkable ignorance, and quite rightly, the College of Heralds said, "No, steady on. We want this changed." A few locos retained the wrong one to the end of their lives, but eventually, those that survived did get the right crest. That's just a little side, but well done for whoever did the research for making sure that was right.
Well, all the research and everything's done in-house by myself and a couple of the guys here, so...
most of it you've got right.
Yeah.
Don't forget the black stocks, though. Don't forget, vital.
Right, so we've had a look at all of the A3s. You've given your expert advice and some criticism as well. It's all very welcome. So thank you very much for coming in, Tony.
Well, as I say, it's been my pleasure. And in a past life, I was a teacher, so pay attention. This is really worth watching. But thank you ever so much. It's been my pleasure.
You're welcome. And we'll do this again for when the A4's coming. So we'll do the A4 samples fairly soon. So you're more than welcome to come back again, and we'll do exactly the same exercise.
Thank you
ever
so much.
You're welcome.
Thank
Right.
you.
So, if you'd like to see some more of our videos, please like and subscribe with us. There'll be links down below here, and we will see you again soon.